course I start filming as soon as my neighbors... Anyway, goth is used as a whole to describe the entire subculture, but it's also used as an umbrella term for all the substyles within the subculture. This image right here has been on my Pinterest feed for years. It's been a small visual guide in my entire alternative journey that I keep looking at, trying to figure out where I belong within all of the subcategories. But as I've kind of found myself within all the different substyles and found a style that works for me, even if it's not set in a category of all the goth substyles, I think it's still a really fun visual guide as to kind of figure out which visual or substyle might be for you. For me, it was a great visual guide to figure out what I liked, what I didn't like. Oh, my cat jumped on my bed. We will be featuring at least one kitty today. I don't know if you'll be able to see her. She's camera shy. And although it's a great visual guide, you don't have to jump into just one of them. You can make your own mishmash out of all of them, just like me. I've just found this a really great That was my cat. I've just found this a really great visual guide to kind of figure out what I do like, what I like a little bit less, this, that. While I was looking at the original artist's DeviantArt page, I did notice that they made an updated version. So if you want me to make a separate video on the other ones, I will do so. It's just that this video is going to be long in and of itself, and I didn't want to make it longer than it was already going to be. Before I jump in though, I have a few things to say. I'll put a timestamp somewhere on the screen as to where you can jump if you don't want to hear all of this. But first of all, I am so grateful that people liked my first video. That is an insane thing to witness. I did not expect getting 1K views, let alone 10. Last I checked, I was like at 11 or 12K views and 1K likes, which is insane. I am incredibly glad it resonated with people and people found it well-researched, well-spoken. People just found it an interesting topic. And I am so grateful for all the people that are now joining me on my channel and joining me on this crazy ride that if I were to tell 12-year-old me that she would be making YouTube videos, I would not believe you. Another quick PSA I want to give is that this is just a lighthearted explanation of all of the different substyles, or at least some of the different substyles within the goth umbrella. This is not, you have to dress like this or you're not goth, you have to do this, you have to look like this, and you have to act like this. No, this is just a lighthearted video about this image that has greatly helped me in my own alternative journey, but it's not at all a gatekeeper-y way of being like, you can't be goth unless you do this, this, and this. No. It's just to help people like me who want to dress more alternatively, want to dress more gothic, but don't know what style is for them. Of course, I'm going to start with trad goth. Trad goth, known under many names, which are traditional goth or batcave or post-punk or whatever, originated in the late 70s to early 80s, and it came along with the original goth movement. The name Batcave Goths came from the original scenes which traditional goths started up, such as clubs like the Batcave. The goth scene eventually peaked in the 90s, but quickly collapsed because of the industrial and EBM scene swooping in. I made a video including the history of goth. If you want to check it out, be sure to do so. Trad goths are often seen as elitists or gatekeepers by people who dress goth purely for the aesthetic, especially new goths and mall goths or pastel goths. They're frustrated by the fact that trad goths hammer on them not being real goth, and vice versa for just clashing constantly. Trad goths try to be way more mindful of the iconography they use in their fashion this day and age. They make sure they understand the influences of the imagery they use, and I'd like to think that's also partially why you're here, to gain more knowledge on what everything in the goth subculture means or why certain goths dress the way they dress. Something very, very important to remember is that all kinds of people, no matter religion, no matter culture, no matter gender, no matter sex, no matter race, are a part of the goth community and have been since the start of the movement. There's no official goth substyle that accepts any kind of racism, sexism, homophobia, anything. There's a very harmful stereotype that you have to fit a certain look to fit into goth substyles, and that is absolutely not the case. If you are respectful in the community, if you are respectful in the way you dress, if you upkeep the same motives and norms that the original goth movement found so important, then hey, welcome to the club. Trad goth is definitely not the only way to be a part of the greater goth community. As you will see in this list, you don't even have to dress in all black constantly to fit in. The only thing that draws us together is our love for goth music, appreciating and continuing the values of the culture's past, and working towards a continuation of the subculture. However, some staples in a trad goth's wardrobe, and in a lot of goths' wardrobes, are leather jackets, shorter mid-length skirts, fishnets, band tees, spiky accessories, and a whole lot of black and grey. When you come across trad goths in any part of the scene, you'll notice that their makeup is often in the same color schemes, a lot of black eyeliner, a lot of black contour, a lot of black eyeshadow, white face paint, just very dramatic and melancholic, but at the same time very elegant. Same with the hair. Think of the very, very poofy black hair of Susie and the Banshees.
I know I said sushi and the Banshees in my last video. I just want to apologize for that. It's because of the sh in the Banshees, and I have issues with saying the S, so I was mentally preparing for the Banshees part and I said sushi.
If you look at goth icons' hair, you'll see that it's often like very poofy and big. They're often referred to as bat's nests. And of course, the music they listen to is mostly linked to the OG bands from back when the movement started, like Bauhaus, Sisters of Mercy, Joy Division, Christian Death, Voodoo Church, Alien Fiend, and so on and so forth. Once again, and this will be my last time giving this PSA, simply because I know some people in my last video decided to be nitpicky about certain stuff that I didn't explicitly say. I am not saying you can only be a certain type of goth if you only listen to these bands, or only wear your hair this way, or only dress this way. It's just a simple, lighthearted video explaining a bunch of different substyles, so maybe some people who are just getting into the community can find their own special style or way of being goth. Romantic goth finds its origins in the 90s with the ethereal or the second wave of goth rock. Their entire style is inspired or visually similar to the Romantic era, which was in between 1800 and 1850. Their aesthetic focuses on the beauty of both life and death, with things like red wine, dead roses, reading by candlelight. Graveyards and ravens are heavily associated with these goths. Even though romantic goths are already in a style umbrella by themselves, they're also often the base for similar styles like vampire goth, fairy goth, or Victorian goth. I'll get into all of those eventually later on, don't worry. Their makeup is often softer than trad goths, still using darker colors to wash out their face a little, but using a lot of red and white as well as black. In their closet, you'll most often find lacy, flowy dresses or skirts, corsets, vintage jewelry, and formal attire from their preferred period. Their hair also follows the same aesthetic. It's often flowy and elegant, could be straightened or soft waves, but it could also be very dramatic hair, like the elegant yet elaborate styles of the 19th century. The music associated with romantic goths ranges from period-accurate classical pieces to bands playing with similar interests of romantic goths, like Incubus Succubus, Switchblade Symphony, or Lena Lovitch? Don't jump me if I said that wrong, I'm so sorry. I'll make sure to make some playlists and write some artists down in the description, so if you're interested in any of the substyles or any of the music those substyles listen to, you can just click any link below. When I think of cybergoths, I can't help but think of that one video of the ravers under the bridge that's become kind of like a meme, and I think most people will, and I don't know if that's good or bad. Cybergoth was a term first used in 1988 by Games Workshop to promote Dark Future, a role-playing game set in a post-apocalyptic world. Cybergoth as a subculture, however, only emerged in the 90s with the rise of the industrial and EDM music, which is kind of where the switch from trad goth to cybergoth came into play. Gravers, aka goth ravers, spread its popularity in the early 2000s with online communities like alt.gothic.cybergoth, a site where rave enthusiasts from the goth scene all over the world could connect. Eventually, cybergoths received mainstream attention due to Eisenfunk's music video for Pong, along with the cybergoth dance meme party dance meme thing that I mentioned before. As you can see in that video, cybergoth includes a lot of PVC, vinyl, and other artificial looking materials in fluorescent colors, taking a futuristic look. They'll either dye their hair vibrant colors or use colorful hair pieces known as cyberlocks, which can be made from all kinds of materials. Other things you'll often see in their look are bright makeup, body mods, gas masks, goggles, platform shoes, and even LED lights. The music they listen to seems pretty self-explanatory, going along with the shift from goth or post-punk to industrial music.
My accent is all over the place today. I am so sorry. I've been speaking Dutch the entire day. I have a tattoo appointment in a bit. I also have to speak Dutch there. I keep switching from Dutch to English, to Dutch to English. It's a struggle. I'm sorry.
This one is gonna be so much fun to edit. Shout out editing Lisa, because I don't have to deal with this now, but you will have to later. Even though there's always been a slight component to the goth subculture, goths take it to a whole new level. These type of goths originated from the people who liked wearing the more BDSM-related clothes, sometimes associated with the goth fashion. Think of leather corsets and chokers, big boots, glossy latex, fishnets, the list goes on. I do think it's important to emphasize that just because people enjoy dressing in a more adult theme way, that does not mean that they want to be touched or harassed, and they especially are not asking for it. Goth is a clothing style just like any other clothing style. It is not a means of giving consent to anything, and it might even be worn by people who aren't even into the but just like the look of it. I am all for dressing the way you want. Like, life is way too short. Dress however you want to dress, but please keep in mind that wearing full goth gear in public is not safe. Goth clubs are definitely not going to be the ones to discriminate by how people are dressed or how they express their sexuality. That's why some clubs might even have nights dedicated to goths, simply to give them a safe space to dress the way they want to dress, simply because of how dangerous it is to wear it outside. Also very important, if you are a minor and you want to dress in a more goth way, I am not recommending you partake in this substyle. I think there's a very obvious reason why not. I am not one to gatekeep, but I think there's a very, very, very important difference between gatekeeping and keeping children safe. Even if you're 17 and you are an adult at 18, like here in Belgium, even if you're 20 and you'll be an adult by the time you're 21 in the US, life is short. Dress the way you want to dress, but do it when it's appropriate. I think that's very obvious, especially in the context of goth. Hippy goth became known somewhere around the mid to late 80s, but it was probably already a visual thing as a part of the original hippie movement back in the day. It just didn't have a name. As the name suggests, it's a crossover between hippie culture and goth culture. Hippie goths are usually very eco-friendly, very animal-friendly, which they share with hippies, but their difference lies in a love for the more morbid and darker things than the regular hippie lifestyle or fashion. Most hippie goths also find themselves practicing, or at least are very interesting in the occult or other earth religions, things like magic, pagan, or Wicca. Of course, not everyone that is interested in these practices is a hippie goth, and not every hippie goth is interested in these practices, but they definitely overlap. There aren't any requirement to be hippie goth. Many of the stereotypical goth stuff is lost. Looks-wise, hippie goths are very similar to All About Eve, who popularized the look, and they're pretty visually similar to a lot of the more ethereal goth bands. The typical clothing for hippie goths is very similar to hippie style clothing. Long dresses, flowy shirts, bell bottoms, bandanas and large glasses. And there's a lot of occult symbols like sigils or pentagrams that are very common in both clothing and accessories, and honestly just any type of black or red pieces in your wardrobe will already gothify a very un-goth aesthetic or style. As I said before, All About Eve popularized the look. That is why a lot of hippie goths will listen to bands like All About Eve, Incubus Succubus, Faith and the Muse, Cocteau Twins, and Tones on Tail. J-goth, or also called Leda goths, got popularized through VK bands like Malice Miser and Duran Gray. A lot of people credit Mana from Malice Miser for truly kickstarting the style, although others say it became famous through X Japan, which is another band from around that time. It isn't goth as we know it. It is heavily inspired by early goth and punk fashion. A lot of people entering the J-goth community will either do it through like the alternative scene in Japan or cosplaying, stuff like that. It heavily overlaps with VK, but it isn't completely VK. It's like it mixes a lot, but it's not the same, but it does take a lot of inspiration from each other. Does that make sense? I don't know. I think the best way to explain it is it's as much of a style under the VK umbrella as it is under the goth umbrella, but don't fully take that to heart, because I don't know if that's right. That is just what I think it is. Visual K or VK are bands like Malice Miser and Duran Gray. They mostly use a mix of punk and goth and other elements, not only in their music, but also in their style. And a lot of them want to look more feminine. I personally love VK, especially Malice Miser. I've been into them for a very long time. But the first time I saw them, I genuinely thought they were women. So that kind of gives you a good mental image of how feminine and how androgynous they managed to look, which is so cool. As they look more feminine or androgynous, a lot of things they'll choose in their style will have ruffles or bows. It'll be lacy, it'll be flowy, like dresses, stockings with Mary Jane shoes, lacy bonnets, chokers, parasols, and a lot of other things that just make them look like a porcelain doll. And obviously, I don't have to elaborate on the fact that they'll most likely listen to VK bands like Duran Gray and Malice Miser, and some of the ones in this list don't really make sense to me or the people in those things because they don't associate themselves with goth. Just like Rivetheads, they deny being connected to goths, which is why I found it weird that they were in this list. But their style is often what confuses people who aren't alternative. Their fashion overlaps a lot with goth, but their attitude and politics are more hardcore, making them lean closer to the punk subculture, which is also what they branched off of. Initially, the term Rivethead had been used since the 1940s as a nickname for North American automotive, assembly line, and steel construction workers. In 1993, Glenn Chase released Rivethead Culture, a compilation of several electro-industrial and industrial rock songs from the American underground music scene. Glenn is pretty much responsible for giving Rivetheads the meaning it has today. And a lot of their clothing can be found in goth stores simply because their clothes are predominantly black and have some visual ties to cybergoth because they emerged around the same time. Their style is both visually similar to goths but also to military uniforms, opting for black, gray, or olive shirts or band tees, leather jackets with painted on band logos, cargo pants, combat or military boots. And a lot of women also opt for more goth looking items like corsets, vinyl pants, high stiletto boots or combat boots, and all that. Their hair is pretty much the same over both genders, and also very similar to hardcore punks around that time. They'll either have long dreads, which makes them look similar to cybergoths, but then they'll also have buzz cuts. It's all around. And if you go back to Chase's Rivethead Culture as a reference, the music they listen to is mainly industrial or electro. Once again, it has nothing to do with goth, just looks very visually similar, and that's why it's on the list. Perky Goth, also known as Baby Doll Goth, or at least I think they're the same. Some sources said they are the same, some sources said they are not the same. I am slightly confused, but I'm just gonna say they are at least very, very similar, if not the same. They blend the dark, spooky elements of traditional goth with more vibrant, upbeat tones, adding a lot of playful accessories to the dark clothing, presenting melancholic themes with a happy-go-lucky attitude, and mainly just combining somber with sunny. If you had to think in pop culture references, I guess it would be a mishmash between Enid and Wednesday, if that makes sense. With their fashion, black is still the base, but there's a lot of bright and cheerful colors, patterns with bold stripes and polka dots, and just a lot of eye-catching things. Pretty much think of 80s fashion mixed with goth, but not trad goth, because trad goth's also like around the 80s. To think of like very colorful 80s mixed with goth. Just playing with a lot of textures, playing with a lot of materials, a lot of layers, everything. Perky Goths will often style their hair in extravagant or vibrant ways, once again dyeing it all kind of funky colors. Popular ways to wear their hair would be in space buns or other updos. Hair accessories like bows or cute gothic related items like pink bats or cute coffins would be added to those hairstyles. The best example of Perky Goths would be strawberry switchblades looks, playing with the very mainstream fashion of the 80s, mixing it with goth. Examples in games would be Little Misfortune, Fran Bow, or Alice Madness Returns. A lot of the bands they might listen to would include Strawberry Switchblade, Alien Fiend, The Cure, Voltaire. On the completely opposite side of the spectrum, we have Mopey Goths. If you were to ask someone what the most stereotypical view is they could give off of goths, they'll probably describe Mopey Goths. Their attitude or their aesthetic is very sad. Like these goths don't appear happy ever, playing into the way people stereotypically see goth. Their aesthetic is very dark and gloomy, no trace of happiness, no trace of color. Think of someone writing angsty poetry in a fully dark room with black light bulbs. When they go outside, they're probably likely to lurk in the shadows of clubs waiting for someone to talk to them instead of them talking to someone else. And I know the way I'm talking about them sounds really, really mean. Once again, I'm not trying to be mean, I'm not trying to be rude. Once again, this is a very lighthearted video about all kinds of substyles. I'm just trying to explain it in a lighthearted way. I did do a lot of research, so most of the things I say, I hope, are well researched and true. But Mopey Goth is pretty much what I'm saying. It's very playing into the sadness and the melancholic feel of goth. But I know as well as you, I hope, that these people are very sweet, very kind. They're probably very introverted. They might be struggling with their mental health, and they find that Mopey Goth is the best way to express themselves. And who am I to judge that, you know? They just pretty much emphasize a profound sense of melancholy and sadness through their fashion choices or just all-around demeanor. Their fashion choices will often emphasize the profound sense of melancholy and sadness. They care less about flashy trends and more about sharing their deep emotions. Mopey Goths will favor a darker, more muted palette, and they'll use items to express themselves. Long black skirts, oversized shirts and sweaters are very common, layering silver accessories and different textures to show the complexity of them as a person and their feelings. And the music they listen to is pretty much the same as traditional goths, but there are some bands that are specifically Mopey Goth simply because they use a lot of torture or horror. Although Deathrockers aren't completely goth, they are considered the missing link between goth and punk. Deathrock fuses the two movements together, staying in the interesting transition stage that happened between the late punk movement to the first trad goths, to the fashion, but not. Their aesthetics are very similar to goths, wanting to enjoy the darker spin on the punk style post-punk gave ethic with the more darker colors or the morbid vibes from goth. They'll make a lot of handmade accessories, using patches to upcycle old basics and mixing it with gothic staples. The most famous part of their look would probably be the death hawk. It's known in both goth and punk subcultures. It resembles the punk mohawk, but it's a little messier, just like the hair of trad goths. It's just visually very similar in the transition between punk to goth. The bands they listen to are also from that time period, They're mainly the bands who originally inspired or played into the shift from punk to goth, like 45 Graves, Voodoo Church, London After Midnight, Christian Death, and Alice Cooper. Previously used as an insult to new or inexperienced goth, Baby Bat has changed to a much more loving way of referring someone who's just getting started in their goth journey. Baby Bats will often ask elder goths for makeup or fashion advice, music or book recommendations, and they'll start slowly looking for their place in the subculture. I myself graduated from being a baby bat not too long ago. As I mentioned in my previous video, I grew up around a lot of alternative people. I've been alternative all my life, but I never really looked into what made alternative fashion. I didn't know the politics, or I knew very, very, very basic what the politics and the ethics were, but I didn't know anything about the fashion, the things they used, why they used it, all that stuff. And now that I'm very much in it and I have researched a lot, I do feel comfortable sharing what I have found in my own journey in the community, so I might help some other people who are just getting started in the community or who want to get started in the community find their place in the community. I think the best way to describe the baby bat stage is that it's the period where people start seeping into the subculture. They decide if it's for them, what it's like, what they like. If they do want to be a part of it, they'll start searching for their own place within the greater goth community. They'll look for the bands they enjoy, the sounds they enjoy, the visuals they enjoy, and so on and so forth. I'll be the first to admit, baby bat time can be a little embarrassing to look back on. If I look at my older dabbles, even like my emo phase when I was 12, I was definitely still trying to find the right fit for me. And although it's embarrassing, it is fun to see like, hey, I found my place. I know that all of this very messy, very cringy struggling made me who I am today, both personally and in the subculture. And it's just fun to see yourself finding yourself over time. What I would definitely recommend for baby bats stumbling on this video, or people who want to become baby bats, Gothic Charm School by Gillian Venters. Venters? Maybe. It's an advice column and a book and a website all about goth styles, tips, tricks, just anything you need for your journey. I swear, that thing saved my life. Just overall, don't be embarrassed by trying to find your way in the community. Don't be embarrassed by trying stuff out. Like I said with Hippy Goths, just adding more black or more velvet to your closet can already gothify a lot of not goth stuff. So if you want to start trying it out, I say, hey, why not, you know? Corp Goth, short for corporate goth, is not only used by goths but also by other alternative people who wanna dress the way they dress but have to keep a dress code for work. They'll try to fit in their own substyles into their work attire as much as possible by adding on extra accessories like extra jewelry or pocket watches, or just doing their makeup a little bit darker. Most work appropriate attire is already easy to gothify. Think of like black dress shirts, ties, pencil skirts, suits, and tailcoats. Even pinstripe patterns are very popular within work attire and in just overall goth fashion. While goth is definitely a phase for some people, it is a lifestyle for others. And Corp Goth lets them keep their aesthetic choices while also not instantly getting rejected from an important job interview. As for music, there isn't really a set one for Corp Goth, since it's a substyle used by all kinds of alternative people. So their music basically transitions on from the substyle they're usually a part of. Victorian goths, very much like romantic goths, merge classic goth with Victorian era fashion. That also means that they're very similar to each other because the eras are so close to each other. Not only is it very similar to romantic goth, it's also very similar to Lolita, because Lolita uses a lot of Victorian elements in their fashion. Being inspired by writers like Edgar Allan Poe or Bram Stoker, Victorian Goths wish to convey an image of decorum and dignity, focusing a lot on Gothic literature and music. Their aesthetics are very similar to the high society of that period, partaking in activities like going to the theater or a masquerade, having tea parties or poetry reading with friends. Some of them wish to be completely historically accurate, while others are fine with just being visually similar. In this substyle, fashion and clothing are the main focus. Dark-colored, period-accurate dresses and suits, along with Gothic accessories and makeup, are staples. Think of the large ball gowns, top hats, or even morning dresses. The best example of Victorian Goth in pop culture would be things like Sweeney Todd or Corpse Bride. As you might have guessed, the music they listen to is very period accurate, with opera and classical music pieces from that time being very popular, but also modern bands who take inspirations from those sounds, like Celestial Eon Project, Rasputina, and Peter Gundry. Just like Victorian Goths who love Gothic music and literature, medieval Goths love Gothic architecture like castles or cathedrals. Medieval Goths are generally people who love all tales of dragons, knights, wizards, and other creatures, and they love history, especially the medieval period. They're not just limited to medieval wear. They often include Celtic elements or other elements from old civilizations into their aesthetic. In their closet, you'll find corsets, long dresses with underskirts and long sleeves, lace-up shirts with loose pants, and maybe some swords. Their makeup can be similar to Romantic Goths, doing it rather smoky than very dark, but they do it a bit heavier around the eyes. Once again, just like Victorian Goths, they'll either choose to be very, very period accurate, or they'll choose to just be visually similar. You'll definitely see some of them if you like going to Renaissance fairs. I'm definitely familiar with medieval goth. I think it's really cool. It's not personally my style, but I do think the people that are very into it look amazing. Music-wise, they'll mostly listen to folk and metal, but in general, they just listen to a lot of classical or Gregorian chants or medieval goth bands who incorporate those chants in their own music. Many goths and metalheads will point out that these two subcultures are completely different entities. They listen to completely different music, they have different origins and histories, they have different habits and aesthetic choices, but they are just grouped together because people who aren't alternative will see dark clothes and be like, it's the same. Although they are very different, in recent years they have been crossing over more and more. A lot of alt clubs will play both goth and metal, and bands like Typo Negative are found in a lot of playlists for both subcultures. Bands like Lacuna Coil use imagery seen a lot within goth subcultures, and Rammstein and Nine Inch Nails are also boxed in or confused with both goth and metal, since they have very industrial influences. Whether you put them in the same category of goths or not is very up to you and how you personally think of goth and metal. I definitely don't put them in the same category simply because metal is not goth music, goth can be metal, you know? They cross over in some things, especially in recent years, but they are very completely different entities, so I would rather say that they're not really a part of the goth substyle umbrella. I think they're more like cousins than siblings, if that makes sense. Before anyone jumps me, I did not make this list, okay? I'm just a messenger. I am just going by the drawing. I am just following the list of the drawing. Don't, okay? Don't. But I do understand why emo is grouped in the same category as goth, since I think that emo, just as metalheads, are cousins rather than siblings of goth. Like, from the perspective of someone who doesn't care or doesn't know about all the names of alternative styles, I do get that emos look very similar to goths, but if you were to tell little 12-year-old me that goth was the same as emo, I would have popped off. Like, I would have earned actually the f*** out of you.
I remember sitting in English class. There was a sentence that had dressing goth in it, And my classmates didn't know what goth was. So they asked my teacher, and my teacher was like, well, I don't really know what it is either. So they started looking it up, and she puts a picture up on like the board. And it was like a cheap Morticia Addams party costume. And all of a sudden, I just hear someone, because I remember sitting in the back left of the class, and all of a sudden someone over there just goes, oh, like Lisa dresses. And all of a sudden, like half of the class, their heads turned to me. I'm just like, I was about to pop off. I was about to burn actually the out of them. But I didn't do it, because in hindsight, I get it, but that pissed me off, bro.
As I was reading up for like the history of emo, I found myself very interested in it, and I have done a bit of a deep dive in the history of goth and punk before in my previous video. So if you would like a breakdown of the history of goth, let me know, because I am definitely interested in making a video about it. Emo, or emotional hardcore, originated in the United States, evolving from Washington's hardcore punk scene in 1958 at Revolution Summer, an event for people involved in the straight edge movement. This movement was a response for the increasing violence at local punk shows. They were trying to create events that were much more safer and fun for everybody. Eventually, emo core bands started differentiating themselves from the hardcore punk scene, not only by their anti-violence attitude and their stance against substance abuse, but also because they became very musically different. And not only do they overlap visually with goth, but also a lot with scene kids. And each subculture is annoyed by being confused with the other, although we can't deny that there are a lot of overlapping factors. Just like in goth styles, common things related to emo style would be like broken hearts, skulls, guns, coffins. They'd wear overly skinny jeans, band tees, hoodies, Converse or Vans, accessorizing with rubber bracelets with band names on it, striped arm or leg warmers, and the oh so famous checkered belts. I am still sad to this day that we don't have a Hot Topic in Europe, I think. Or at least we don't have one in Belgium. I don't think we have one in Europe, because the studded belts have had a grip on me for as long as I can remember. Early participants of the emo subculture were also referred to as Spock rock, in reference to Star Trek's Spock, due to their extremely straight black hair, which I think is very funny. And of course, as we all know, the emo subculture became very, very popular on MySpace. I'm sure we all know and remember the swept bangs, the choppy layers, the thick black eyeliner, the lyrics written on shoes, and yada yada yada. The music of emos ranges quite a lot, since emo can be traced back in 4 different waves. The first wave was emo core. Bands like Rites of Spring, The Hated Ones, and One Less Breath were very popular. During the Midwest emo wave, you had bands like Sunny Day Real Estate, Jimmy Eat World, and Midwest Pen Pals. With screamo, bands like Circle Takes the Square, Bless the Fall, and Poison the Well gained popularity. And lastly, emo pop, derived from pop punk, gave us the bands we all know and love, like My Chemical Romance, Pierce the Veil, Paramore, Taking Back Sunday, and so many more. Vampire used to be and still is sometimes used as a derogatory term for goths. However, goths have been reclaiming it as part of their aesthetic. Although the original folklore of vampires can be traced back to multiple Balkan countries, they are not what inspires vampire goths today. Vampire goths are very inspired by things like Bram Stoker's Dracula, or even the recent adaptation of Nosferatu, where many of the symbols we associate with vampires, such as bats, capes, and fangs, are all shown. In older vampire stories, most vampires were seducing younger women into becoming vampires. In modern fiction, however, vampires can be any gender. Vampires in literature, and as a result, vamp goths, will dress in the fashion of the era they were turned in or made a vampire in, portraying themselves as elegant but looking somewhat out of the time frame. They're influenced by styles of the Victorian era, just like Victorian Goths, but also styles from the 17th and the 18th century. If I had to summarize their style, I'd say, just as musician Voltaire once said, vampire goths are essentially romantic goths with fangs, which I think is a great explanation. Vamp goths are very, very elegant. They opt for more dark red, black, and grey a lot. Items like gloves, off-the-shoulder or sleeveless dresses, boots, and fancy hats are all very common. As for their music, A lot of bands in and around the goth scene have done at least one vampire song or vampire themed song, but I think the most obvious or the most famous one would be Bela Lugosi's Dead. Luckily, those once in a while vampire songs aren't all there is. A lot of vamp goth music will include baroque rock, classic rock, goth or industrial sounds, anything that conveys a dark, moody atmosphere. Think of bands like Sisters of Mercy, Susie, and the Banshees, Screaming Jay Hawkins, and Mayhem. Geek Goth places much less emphasis on the fashion side of goth subcultures and more on its overtones of dark fantasy. Many of them may not look stereotypically goth or as goth as other subcultures, but more often than not, they know a whole lot more about the symbolisms or the artistic influences behind the subcultures. Geek Goths are also much more inclined to partake in roleplay or roleplay games like D&D. They go to conventions. They're probably very into sci-fi, anime, fantasy or horror novels, and love TV shows or film with a gothic appeal. As I just said, it's much less focused on the fashion side of goth, most of them dressing in a banty or merch related to an interest of theirs, accessorizing with things that show off the fandoms they might be in with a little bit of a darker twist. They also don't really have any set music. They listen to anything that is within the goth umbrella. There aren't any specific bands or sounds that are made for this style, but I personally would put things like, what's their name? The Living Tombstone in this category, simply because like they make music about video games. Some of their music is more spooky and dark. I'm not saying The Living Tombstone is goth, I'm just saying it could be in this category. Gothabilly, my beloved, the thing that captured me into the more gothic scene. Gothabilly is also known as Hellbilly. It's a music genre and an aesthetic that combines the classic rockabilly style of the 50s with gothic elements. The influences in Gothabilly music come from early rock and roll icons like Chuck Berry and Little Richard, and combine those with the iconic goth band sounds. The term was first used in the late 70s by the Cramps to describe their blend of rockabilly with punk rock. The style is also linked to death rock, since there's a heavy amount of love for all things vintage and horror, or vintage horror. As they mix together edgy and retro vibes in their music, they create the same mix in their fashion, featuring retro prints like polka dots, animal prints, and cherries, but also adding in more gothic patterns like skulls, spiderwebs, and bats. They'll use darker, yet still outstanding colors to form a contrast between the all-black of the goth substyle, while wearing typically rockabilly clothes like swing skirts, blouses, leather jackets, capri pants, cat-eye glasses, and so many more iconic 50s or pinup items. Their hairstyles are more often than not inspired by rockabilly styles. Victory rolls, pinup curls, and other vintage styles are used a lot within the subculture. And as the Cramps were one of the first bands to be labeled Gothabilly, bands like Misfits, Tiger Army, Coffin Cats, and Horror Pops soon followed. Cabaret Goth, also referred to as burlesque goth, is a substyle defined by its incorporating of aesthetics that are common in cabaret or burlesque shows, adding elegant and classy to something that is otherwise known as promiscuous. I do want to add that there's a difference between cabaret and burlesque performances. True cabaret and burlesque must be classy as it is sexy. Cabaret also adding in an aspect of comedy. So they are two separate entities. The thing is that their fashion and their visuals are very, very similar to each other in a lot of aspects. Icons in the burlesque scene who are often used as an inspiration for cabaret goths are Dita Von Teese, which, wow, I love her. I love her. That's all. I can't say anything else. I love Dita Von Teese. She's iconic. I love her. Although I'd also argue that Frankenfurter from Rocky Picture Horror Show is also cabaret goth, or at least has some cabaret goth outfits. And I can't lie, I kind of want that closet. Like, I'm not gonna lie, there are some iconic outfits in there. Holy shit. Cabaret or burlesque fashion is often associated with women, but it's obviously not just for women. Men can also definitely enjoy the style. Men often resemble a particular cross between Dracula, Charlie Chaplin, and a mime, but they have a class that is all their own. As you'll see in a lot of burlesque or cabaret acts, there's a lot of corsets, a lot of garters, fishnets, feathers, and mermaid-style dresses. They'll often do their hair like Gothabillys, focusing on vintage or 1950s styles. Another important factor is that Cabaret Goth is very typified by Dresden Dolls. Their music is one of the most commonly listened to within this substyle, but bands like Cinema Strange, Tiger Lilies, Gang Children, and Voltaire are also staples in playlists of Cabaret Goths, as well as just any songs that can be used in burlesque performances. And might I add, the soundtrack of Cabaret the Musical. Or at least from the movie. Like Lisa Minnelli's version of some of those songs are, I love them. I listen to them on the daily. I think steampunk is one of those styles that a lot of people know, but they don't know that it's a part of the greater goth umbrella. Much like its futuristic counterpart cyberpunk, steampunk finds its origin in literature, especially in the works of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. And while it doesn't share the same nihilistic view of everything in the world, which is often seen in cyberpunk, it does share the rebellious spirit. Steampunk started as a subgenre of science fiction, incorporating technology with industrial steam-powered machinery. It often explores the anachronistic idea of what could have happened if we decided to use steam as a primary source of energy instead of the energy sources we use today, and maintain a Victorian-looking style. As they try to maintain a Victorian-looking style, it is very obvious that steampunk is very visually similar to Victorian goth, but also to cyberpunk. Their fashion mixes gears and screws, as well as analog clocks, rotating propellers, and dials. They're always made of metal or wood or even glass, but never plastic or other modern materials. Other common clothes are Victorian-style suits, waistcoats, top hats or long dresses. Lace, leather, and brass are also very, very common materials. Accessories, much like in cyberpunk or cybergoth, are very important to steampunk. Popular ones include brass or copper jewelry, pocket watches, and goggles. One of the defining features of steampunk is its use of technology and machinery. We surprisingly see a lot of steampunk in media, but a lot of famous examples would be Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, Oz the Great and Powerful, Un Monstre à Paris, The House from Howl's Moving Castle, or things like the BioShock series, or even Alice the Madness Returns. There's not really a music scene related to steampunk, but artists like Rasputina, Emily Autumn, and Abney Park all have a very steampunk appeal. Fairy goth is considered a crossover between romantic and hippie goth, but also sometimes includes influences of the Japanese dark Mori style. Instead of vampire goths being very into vampires, fairy goths are much more interested in the fantasy and mythical themes like forest spirits, fairies, and so on. They prefer very flowy garments, long robes, and even fairy wings in their fashion, just using anything that'll make them look very ethereal, magic, and just all around very inspired by their creatures of choice. Fairy goths will most likely listen to bands that play with atmospheric melodies like Cocteau Twins, Black Tape, Blue Girls, and the Changelings. I know I'm giving a lot of information on some substyles and then not as much on others. It's because sometimes they're a mix of two that I have explained, and the visuals just speak for themselves, plus there isn't much detailed information about those styles. With some styles I do feel comfortable giving my own opinion, like in Cabaret or Burlesque Goth, because I do really like the style, I do dress like the style, but things with like Fairy Goth I have not much experience with, so I don't want to speak on it if I don't have that much knowledge of it. But if anyone feels like adding on some things, make sure to leave it in the comments. I think I'm gonna pin a comment and just edit in some information if I missed some things, because I do want this to be informative. While the picture says tribal goth, I want to switch it up a bit. During my research, I found a bunch of indigenous people from all around the world saying that this substyle makes them very, very uncomfortable. I want my channel to be a safe space, and while I can't take everyone's individual triggers into account, I do want to try my best to listen and make my content appropriate for everyone. That is why I am switching Tribal Goth for Afro Goth, and I'm gonna focus on Afro Goth instead. Afro Goth is dedicated to celebrating people of color in the goth and punk community. There sadly is a stereotype tied to goth, with some people saying that goth or punk can only be practiced if you're white, which is insane to me. Alternative subcultures originated from all types of people coming together without judgment. Black people had a massive impact on not only the punk music scene, but also the movements all around it. Fellow alternative creator and writer Jade's Island published an article on Afro Goth, and I want to share a part of it that really stuck with me. The moment phrases like "goth so white" started popping up within alternative fashion spheres, I wanted to start a riot. People needed to know that a big titty goth girlfriend wasn't just someone who was white. Gothic fashion is real upon melanin-rich skin. There is nothing more divine than being draped in all black and showing the world who rules Gothic fashion. As I scrolled through Instagram under the hashtag AfroGoth, I really hyped up my interest in the style. I've never felt more temptation to pull out my black velvet and thigh-high black boots and stomp over my pastel closet. This is the style. This is a movement. Afrogoth is a term that combines Afro with Gothic, a phrase that brings unity of ethnicity to an alternative lifestyle that frequently excludes those participants. Today I want to highlight some Afrogoths that remind the world that they exist each time they step out of the door. This is what Afrogoth looks like, and it's time you stop limiting yourself to one definition of goth. I'll link her site and especially this article and her socials in the descriptions. I contacted her to make sure I could use her writing in this video, and she's genuinely such a cool person and such a sweet person. So I would definitely recommend to check her out, if not just this article written by her. Afrogoth combines traditional goth elements like dark and dramatic aesthetics and mixes them with the personal cultural background of people in the community. That means that within this substyle, it creates a distinctive and vibrant expression of goth identity, celebrating both the dark allure of the subculture and the richness of black and métis heritage. I should speak French. I should know how to pronounce this, but I'm so nervous to pronounce it wrong that I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. It showcases how the goth subculture can evolve and adapt to include a variety of backgrounds and influences. And I know that the original list is over, but I do have a few other substyles that are honorable mentions. Pastel Goth is yet again a controversial one. It's still pretty new. Pastel Goth first emerged from groups on vk.com, and it rose to popularity on Tumblr, particularly due to the pastel grunge or pastel goth fan edits of their favorite YouTubers and characters. It mixes goth or mall goth with soft grunge and pastel colors while also taking inspiration from Guro Kawaii. Please do note that pastel goth and Guro Kawaii are not the same thing. They're very different things. They just take inspiration. Gothic themes such as skulls, crosses, pentagrams are often paired with pastel clothing and accessories. It offers a fresh take on the goth fashion all around. Pastel Goth is just the name of the subculture. It doesn't really have anything to do with goth as a subculture. It just uses a lot of the same aesthetics. That's very important to note because I don't want people to be mad at me. Although it died down a bit more in the late 2010s, Pastel Goth somewhat regained popularity in the early 2020s, being incorporated a lot within the e-girl, e-boy, e-kid aesthetic. I remember being a Dan and Phil fan during that time and just being infatuated with the Pastel Goth edits of them, just the Pastel Goth aesthetic. I would dress in skater skirts and pastel colors, creepers, and other stereotypical things like bows with eyeballs on them, or pink skeletons in my hair, garters, offensive sentences or words in like a kawaii or drippy font, and so much more, which in hindsight was pretty problematic because let's see, what time was it? I was like 10, which you know, I shouldn't really be wearing a shirt that says or wearing garters at like 10, but that aside. And like I said, this just has goth incorporated in the name. It doesn't really have anything to do with the subculture itself, so there isn't really any music that is associated with Pastel Goth. Whimsigoth is an aesthetic that regained popularity in recent years, but it had its peak in popularity in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. Their visuals are often characterized by blending the dark gothic themes with surreal and whimsical elements. It's often found in a lot of fairy tales or Tim Burton movies. It overlaps with witchcore, cottagecore, traditional gothic fashion, a lot of those like more element-focused styles, creating a look that is both mystical and enchanting. They often include lunar or nighttime themes or the sun with a warm, whimsical twist. Colors you'll often find are the more saturated colors like purple, emerald green, or maroon. They play with layers and patterned fabrics, things like bell sleeve tops, cardigans, maxi skirts, bell bottoms, and gold jewelry, along with some new age or spiritual imagery or just hints at those things all around. Pop culture or media things that would fall under this style would be things like The Craft, Coraline, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Sally from Nightmare Before Christmas, and I would even dare to say some of Phoebe Buffay's outfits from Friends. Music associated with Whimsigoth are often bands like The Cure and Cocteau Twins, but also artists like Stevie Nicks, Kate Bush, Fleetwood Mac, and Florence and the Machine. I also think it gained popularity a bit more just on TikTok and Instagram in and of itself, because it's fun, it's vintage, it's a revival of the 90s. I do think it's a really fun style. I do like dressing Whimsigoth-y. I am more of a vamp, romantic, cabaret goth myself. I'm just a mixture of all of it, but I do really enjoy the Whimsigoth things, like the long skirts and the bell sleeves and the flowy things. My house this is my room, but the rest of my house is very cottagecore-y, Whimsigothy, I'd say. White goth, also called light or ice goth, has nothing to do with skin color. I know it sounds icky, but I promise you it has nothing to do with the skin color. It's simply based around switching the dark colors of goth with white or like lighter shades like beige, cream, or light gray. It's often used by trad goths or like goths in the hotter seasons, because if I wear full black in the sun, I will die. It's not just a style for staying cool, but it's also about exploring the versatility and timelessness of just monochromatic fashion. They'll still incorporate the core elements of goth fashion, like dramatic silhouettes and the love for things spooky, the same materials, but it just replaces the shades. And that often results in just a sophisticated and ethereal look that blends the gothic drama with a serene, almost ghostly elegance. There is, once again, no specific music style for this sub-style of goth, simply because it's just whatever goth style you like, but then flipped, that you're not only wearing black, but you're wearing a lot of white. Ha! Another controversial one. Hey, whoop-de-doo. I'm not gonna make people happy with this video. Also, I've been recording so long that the fucking sun has gone over there. I hope I can finish this in 20 minutes. I have 10 minutes to finish this. So I need to lock in. My Goth, another controversial one, is a term originally used to insult the fashion of the wannabe goths anywhere from the 80s to the 2000s. Mall goths were found to be people imitating the goth fashion style without fully understanding what it's all about. It's basically another way to call someone a poser, if I'm honest. Or it used to be. Let's stick with that. Unlike the original goth subculture, which had its origins in rock and punk, mall goths were fully inspired by goths fashion, but they're most likely found to be listening to nu metal or industrial metal. The whole mall aspect references how a lot of the participants of the substyle would hang around in shopping malls and visit stores like Hot Topic or Spencer's. And I'm going on a side rant. That is truly so fascinating to me. Here in Belgium, or at least the part where I'm mainly from,
there aren't really shopping malls. Like, you'll have a street in a bigger city that is just filled with multiple stores, but we don't have one gigantic center. Like, I guess in some way we'd also be hanging out at malls, but we just hang out in the street where a lot of the stores are and not in a mall. It's just foreign to me. It's weird. Anyway.
As mall goth existed when the internet was still in its early stages, there were many mall goths who made their own websites on hosts such as Angelfire, GeoCities, Tripod, etc., because they didn't feel very welcomed on sites like Vampire Freaks, which was like the MySpace but for goths. Mall goths aren't really considered to be a part of the gothic community since they're more similar to metalheads, but they use the goth suffix as done by other communities like Pastel Goth to describe their style. In recent years, the mall goth aesthetic has gained popularity again due to the overall Y2K revival, especially on social media apps like TikTok, where all of it made a comeback. The typical mall goth style would be a lot of oversized shirts, oversized band tees, striped or checkered prints, chunky shoes. A brand that's often associated with mall goths is Trip NYC, and with Marilyn Manson being credited as one of the main mall goth musicians, other bands like Slipknot, Korn, Rammstein, Cradle of Filth, and even Evanescence are most likely to be found in mall goth playlists. Last but not least, I have 5 minutes to finish this, so I'm gonna be very quick. Bubble goth. It's not really goth. That's and video. No. This substyle was created by an Estonian pop singer, Kerli. I'm just gonna put her name on screen. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Who aims to make the beautiful creepy and the creepy beautiful, something that takes light and dark and puts them together. When publishing her album Love is Dead in 2008, she started being labeled as goth. Specifically, the song Walking on Air became particularly popular and was used to back up the label. A critic described her as bubblegum goth since her music is pop with hints of techno and rock, and she took the label and created bubble goth. Her followers are called moon children and wear 3 dots on their forehead to represent her motif: integrity, love, and unity. ILU. You'll find some elements of cyber goth, some of romantic goth, and some elements of Victorian goth, such as lacy corset, platform boots, and dresses all in lighter colors, pastel colors, blues, white. She also uses black, but she is known for having like many colored highlights in her hair and clothes. Once again, it has no connection to, it's pretty much just describe her style, like specifically hers. But not only her music is attached to it, you're also able to put Poppy and Grimes in the same category. And that was it. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found this informative. Once again, I am so grateful that my previous video is so well liked. I cannot thank you enough. This is insane. I don't have any words. I am so happy. I am so grateful. I hope I can give you some insight, some inspiration, and just overall, I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next one.